Welcome to Fly Action in Focus. I got it right that time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I literally remembered it the second I was saying it.
So yes, third episode out of 4. If you've missed the other ones, worth jumping back and going through some of the history of fly manipulation and activating those artificial patterns. Some good stuff to look back on.
Yeah. What did we look at? In the early one, we looked at sort of historic things like Frank Sawyer, old literature's references to induced takes.
Yeah, and then obviously a bit of our background and development and the way that we'd sort of come sort of stepwise through this particular kind of development in our thinking as well.
Yeah.
And seeing how that, obviously the fish capture at the top of this episode, saying that applies as well to things like streamer fishing. So it's not just a very focused, a very narrow sort of sphere of interest.
And I suppose the point that we're coming around to now in this episode is all of that seems almost trivial when compared to the complexity and depth that they go into in Japanese Tenkara
I think
manipulation.
all of that stuff that we saw was really important and it primed us to be able to understand it.
Yeah.
But then it also, what that meant was we really appreciated how rich and how complex that sort of, or how deep that particular rabbit hole went.
Yeah.
So seeing that in action was just a marvellous thing.
Now, in the same way, if you look around the world in language and culture, there can be some superficially quite simple ideas that have many words, many sort of references.
Yeah, I mean, the classic example is like how many Inuit words there are for snow. Even though they don't have a word that just means snow, it's all the different grades or gradations or whatever it is. Yeah. Again, looking around, there's cultures within Zimbabwe that have at least 8 different words for walking. And that depends on what the surface is and what. But basically,
aren't the tribes that have got so many colours for green, where they have to
same
distinguish,
thing. Yeah.
different plants that could,
particularly in the rainforest, it's different shades of green. And then the flip side of that is other cultures that only have 2 or 3 colours. They don't distinguish between them because they're not important.
Yeah,
which neatly segues into the point I was going to make.
When we see in Tenkara. We talk about the induced take in Western literature, and we've mentioned the word manipulations a few times.
Yeah, there might be the Lysenring lift or the induced take, but that's pretty much as far as it goes.
In Japan, that comes under the sort of umbrella term of sasoi, which kind of means an invitation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's an invitation you can't refuse. There's a bit of a coercion in there.
Inducement, just like induced take.
Exactly, yeah.
But underneath that umbrella, there are, a myriad of words and descriptions.
Yeah, and I think that is the point, is as soon as something becomes different and important enough to justify having its own name, that's a real big clue that it's something you need to pay attention to. So my ears certainly pricked up when we realised that there was different names for different methods of sasoi. So it wasn't just one blanket homogenous thing.
Yeah. And with all those names comes an actual technique that's attached to them that's different from all the other names.
Yeah.
So it may be as simple as the different orientation on stream, or the rhythm of the movement, or it could
it's
be
as fine as you want to slice it. And I think again we did start out with this series talking about how there's more of a background in Stillwater UK fly fishing. There are names for retrieves like speed skating and twiddling and sort of FTA, which
roly-poly.
Yeah, exactly. All that. So that because that was important enough to justify their own definitions, it's exactly the same thing within the Tenkara manipulations. Yeah. It's just that we don't see that within river fly fishing within the West. So it's certainly not just applicable to Tenkara. It's fantastic to see it as a perfect example. That's the perfect model for it. But it isn't only relevant and applicable within Japanese streams and within Tenkara itself.
Yeah.
So, whether or not competition anglers have got their hands on it yet, it is absolutely, a massive advantage to people who want to do that competitive style of fishing.
I've taken what I've learned in Japan, over several visits now, quite a few visits. I've taken it around the world on different rivers, and I'm in a sort of situation now. You find people who fish dry fly only, not from any pretentious or snobbish sort of position, but they just decide that they like that sort of visual element of dry fly fishing. and they'd sooner catch fish in that way than any other way. And if they can't catch it in that way, they'd rather stay at home and wait for a day where they can. I've kind of become like that with manipulated presentations, where I get the most fun out of actually animating the fly. The sort of viciousness that you can get in takes when a fish is hitting a moving fly is, you've got to see it to believe it, really. It's a real sort of exciting moment. Very, very sort of, it's all feeling rather than just the sight.
Yeah, it is a kind of a sensory sort of experience. I think as well, jumping in on that, I can understand why it is so addictive for yourself, and obviously I get massive enjoyment out of it myself. I'm probably not quite as what's the word, selective about the fishing in that method, but it's very addictive because of that sensory aspect, and also because it's so structured and so detailed, and that appeals to my kind of the geek sort of technical nature of things. So these techniques, they're matched to situations, but they're also matched and married to the physical properties of the flies. And that's what I go into quite a lot of detail within the book, How to Fool Fish with Simple Flies, that you get that marriage idea. But obviously you need to know how those flies, the properties of those flies actually are brought to life, not animated by the different techniques, or in some cases held static by those techniques.
I mean, that's a manipulation in itself.
Yeah. So essentially, we've been enjoying great success around the world on our home rivers, when we fished overseas, obviously when we fished in Japan. But the thing to stress is it's not just applicable. It's only, it's not the case that you can only use this in Japan. It's not the case you can only use it with Tenkara tackle as well. Some of those techniques are more suited and you can get more out of it using a Tenkara rig, but all of the things we talk about are possible to recreate on rod and reel as well as with Tenkara rigs.
It's interesting, the capture that at the very start of this episode was on Western tackle with a streamer.
Yeah.
And that's perhaps one of the sort of outliers in terms of manipulations in Western fly fishing.
There's a bit more, there's a bit more not dialogue. There's more terminologies and more sort of like techniques around that are sort of sweep stripping, and there's techniques within that are.
I think there's a commonality with some of the reservoir fishing techniques that you see with streamers, because it's more similar to some of the reservoir patterns that you see. And
I suppose it's a more natural thing to think that fish might move where you're sort of thinking about dead drifting insects, but obviously insects move around under their own steam all the time as well. So
that segues nicely into a dry fly manipulated capture. We had a day, was it last year? I think it was, wasn't it? Where Paul took out the what he likes to call the worst Tenkara rod in the world.
Worst rod.
It's
homemade from garden centre, sort of hardware store, bamboo cane, lashed up together. Terrible action. It's uncontrollable sort of recovery.
We've talked about this rod and this capture before, but it bears looking at one more time. Should we take a quick look at that now? So there's the worst rod in the world on arguably one of the best streams that the British Isles has got to offer.
Yeah, and I deliberately wanted to, for several reasons. One is that it's that classic sort of flat, gin clear chalk stream type environment that people say, oh, Tenkara doesn't work in those situations, and and the fact that I was using that terrible rod with the really nice but very simple still, horsehair twisted line,
Yeah.
and a dry fly, given that I don't want the promises about multiplying the effect of every single fly in your box to be empty. So that's why I've been at pains to talk about the nymphing aspects of things, to show the streamer capture, which was attached to a French leader, which is a relatively unusual way of presenting streamers, to using handmade horsehair lines and a dry fly manipulated. You really can literally multiply the effectiveness and the power of any pattern in your box.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've not mentioned so far, but it's very clear in that clip we've just watched. Paul was forced to fish from the bank. That river doesn't allow wading. So you're in a position where you've got to kind of fish across into the stream. And that brings with it the challenge of different speeds of current causing drag and causing the fly to drag. And one of the things that these manipulations can do is when you find that your fly is in a position where it starts to drag unnaturally, if you start to actually impart movement, that movement of the drag is kind of offset by the movement that you're imparting. So it turns a presentation that's going completely wrong into something that's actually got something positive going for it. It looks like an insect's actively moving rather than caught in a drag.
It's intentional, natural movement rather than unnatural trigger to spook fish. So
you get basically whatever percent would be drag in a drift. You can now maximise the potential of that as well, rather than needing to pick off and recast. So it's kind of an extra bonus, if you like.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the main reasons. This and all the other things that we've talked about, it's what has really given us a foundation of confidence to approach many, many different streams. And that, without beating around the bush, that's a lovely feeling to be able to walk up to a piece of water, a brand new river, and actually have what you know is a robust toolbox of techniques, and know that for every single fly within your collection, you've got layers that you can then apply to that. So you've got plan B, plan C, plan D, and you never feel overwhelmed in that case. And with good reason, because it so often turns those difficult sessions into red letter days. So because of that, and I'm sure that if you have an ounce of sort of angling intuition within you, you're probably quite keen to get into using these systems and this tactical approach yourself. That's what this whole series has been building up to. So in episode 4, which is the next one that's coming up, don't miss it, because we'll be tying all this together. And then we'll also be making you a really special offer that will allow you to get in on a real good exposition of all these techniques. So don't miss it.
If you've not already signed up to the mini tutorial course that we've got that coincides with these videos, there's a link somewhere on screen. It might be above in the description, below in the description, depending on the platform you're watching on right now. In that tutorial course, you will get to watch a free chapter of a DVD that we're just about to launch. There's also some lessons in there, some really nice content.
Yeah,
it's only short, like, what is it, 3 or 4 emails?
It's a very short course, but it gives you that first stepping stone to prove that the stuff works. So we need to show to you that we can help you before we ask you to actually part with any hard-earned cash.
Yeah. Speaking of that, we always like to give a shout out to our Patreon supporters. We're in a position where these videos are free to watch, but they aren't free to make. We have to put quite a bit of work in to get these videos out for you guys. Everyone who supports us on Patreon, big thanks as always. If you're interested in becoming a supporter, we'll also have a link on screen, or you can head to www.patreon.com/Tenkara, where you can find our page and how to become a supporter. I think that does it for
That's it. Just don't miss episode 4.
Yeah, we'll see you then.